Thank you all. Hopefully you hear me okay. It's a real pleasure speaking to all of you. Um, as explained, yes, I'm dealing with data protection topics for governments, for big enterprise, big companies, and I think that data protection must be considered as a core layer in any data or any cybersecurity program today. So let's speak about how to craft a mitigation plan to prevent data breaches or cybercrime. Before to go more in depth, let's re-emphasize on what are the data protection challenges today for financial institution. I would say financial, but not only because of the post-pandemic age. This is some metrics, some numbers we can share with you. Um, Before the pandemic, we used to see in very, let's say, regular normal companies, 10,000 users used to connect from remote offices or HQ offices. But after the pandemic, many companies have on board IT transformation project or digital transformation home working project. So what does it mean today? It means that before you get 10,000 employees, today you get 10,000 offices. In considering that a lot of home worker are today working from home. At the same time, no surprise, in terms of collaborative or cloud collaborative tools, uh, some increase up to 600% for WebEx, 300% for Zoom, and same for Teams. So let's think about what are the most targeted vertical by this massive cloud adoption increase. We get manufacturing, education, real estate, government, and financial services. So financial services have increased by almost 40% the usage of collaborative tools, mostly in the cloud. So it brings to my attention and to probably to your attention, what are the new challenges relying on these new tools adoption, especially when it comes to speak about clouds. So this is a security implication, right? So especially in terms of cloud data exfiltration, um, we saw an increase of almost 170% for DLP incidents versus 2019, meaning 2020 versus 2019. At the same time, we doubled the number of unmanaged devices connecting to the corporate resources. Mainly resources or data hosted in infrastructures as a service or public cloud applications. So it shows what could be the implication having to change how people are working in companies. So think about what are the different challenges to consider in order to protect the data where the data were hosted mostly on-prem before the pandemic and today are hosted to public cloud application or public cloud infrastructures, given the fact that probably you can access to that data from anywhere in the world. So what we can say, this is my statement today. Data is everywhere. So what to consider multiple assets, and it adds some complexity because yesterday when you had to consider data centers, desktop, laptop, databases, host on-prem data centers, servers, today many resources, many data are moved to the cloud. So you probably have on board, some of you, past services over infrastructures to benefit scalability on databases, or how to store the data very easily using infrastructures as a services, or how to ensure continuity in the business activities during the pandemic by using public collaborative tools such as Office 365, such as infrastructures as a service, and by the way, having host today business application, financial application in the infrastructures as a services. So the next statement is data is under your responsibility. If we look at something which is important called as a shared responsibility model, especially when it comes to speak about cloud, let's see what's under your responsibility, what's not, and how to control all that stuff, given the fact that, again, more you get cloud services, more you get cloud infrastructures, in other terms, more you get different resources or assets in your company, more is complex the data protection policies and how to manage that. So that's a real challenge for many companies I saw for the past decade. So right now, I spoke about the cloud responsibility model, right? So let's think about the new resources or the new IT resources you're using in your companies in order to host the data, in order to host the business application, the financial application. So you get the infrastructure, AWS, GCP, Azure, sometimes Alibaba also. You get the platform as a services, right, which are specific services such as databases as a services stored over infrastructures. You get the containers as a services. Think about business applications. Think about the cost many companies are paying today to have on-prem data centers. And the benefits of having infrastructures ready and available today is to make run that business application in a very flexible way over containerized applications such as Docker. Think about the function as a service or simply software as a service. If you look at all of the different layers, physical security, infrastructure, compute, operating system, mostly hosted by the service provider itself, if we look at the data, right, the data control, the data classification and accountability is under your responsibility, right? So whatever the cloud services you elect to ensure your business activities, you keep responsible to protect the data. So in terms of data protection, very, very candid question, but makes sense to ask that question. What is data protection today? So data protection is a mix of three different areas to consider. The first is traditional data protection, mostly relying on backupping the data, replication of data, archiving the data, etc., etc. Next is coming the data security. Data security is mostly how to apply control to protect the data with some requirement, including encryption, including threat monitoring. Let me open the door to threat monitoring because based on my experience, based on the all of the researchers' experience at McAfee, again, when it comes to speak about cloud, threats is about data protection. Threat monitoring is about how to monitor compromised accounts. Think about what happened to Capital One, very famous financial services in US two years back. They have got, I think, couple of millions data exfiltrated from AWS. And think about what was the initial hacking or penetration vector leveraged by bad guys, misconfigured resources for business application hosted in the infrastructures as a services. It was AWS. So threat monitoring is mostly relying on data protection. Authentication, access control. Let me give you an example. Every time I ask a question, no one is raising the hand because they don't want the other knows that their employees, most of the employees can connect to Office 365 from any computer today. What happens if you get an employee buying a new computer, personal computer, is using this personal computer to connect to Office 365? That's dealing with access control. Do you allow download of sensitive data, financial data from Office 365 to unmanaged devices. That's something you need to consider as a use case. How to deal with breach access and recovery issues, or how to deal with classification and policy remediation relying on data loss prevention program. That's part of the data security. And finally, the data privacy. Data privacy is more about regulation, right? Think about, I will come a bit later on that, but POPIA for dealing with personal information in South Africa, regarding the financial assets, financial data, PCI DSS, Bail 1, Bail 2, SOX, etc. So many different regulations you have to deal with. At the same time, why it's so complex? Because the same level of regulation, the same level of policies to deal with the regulation should apply to whatever asset you're running, in considering endpoint, network, web, and cloud today. So this is why it's so complex. And I would say that the probably the solely success criteria in any data protection project is how to drive consistency in how I apply classification and remediation policies wherever the asset is, endpoint, network, web, or cloud. Let's have a look on how privacy regulation is evolving today on the market, on the worldwide market. So since the GDPR in 2018, things are still moving on, right? With the California Consumer Privacy Act, today we get the POPIA in South Africa, like I said before. But the common mindset relying on all of this regulation is more or less simple. You need to consider the letter of law. Letter of the law is what you need to execute, what policy exactly you need to enforce on your data assets. Then you get the spirit of the law. Spirit of the law is you need to protect something, but we don't tell you what are the measures you need to consider to protect the staff. And finally, the strategy and governance. Strategy and governance means that you need to protect your business. You need to protect sometimes your intellectual property. Does intellectual property is a regulated data as a credit card number could be? No. However, if you fail to ensure a proper data protection on a governance perspective to protect your intellectual property, your business will drop down. Okay, so that the three elements to consider. These three elements need to be aligned with four different questions. You should answer at any time. How sensitive is the data? What are the classification criteria applicable to the data? Where the data is stored? Databases in the cloud, databases on-prem, on the desktop, etc., etc. Who can access the data? Who are your business partners allowed to access the most critical data, confidential data, regulated data, private information data, and what is a data lifecycle? Data lifecycle, something important. Think about an acquisition plan. What the sensitivity of this such information before the bank acquire another bank, for instance. This information is quietly confidential. However, what the confidentiality of the information on the information's got public, right? It's public. It's not confidential anymore. So managing the data lifecycle, something you need to consider for any data protection program. So what are the different regulations applying to financial services? I gave you some example. That's not an exhaustive list, but the most well-known on the market. So PCI DSS, you get GLBA, you get GDPR, for instance, POPIA, SOX, and so many one. But the common objective is to make sure the data is protected. The data is stored securely, that the data retention is acceptable based on your business needs, etc., etc. So most of them are relying on data protection and data privacy. Next, think about the common causes of data losses. As I said before, unauthorized access. How do you monitor the access to most critical data? So meaning, how do you build a context of risk based on who you are, what information trying to access, and where you're connecting from. Insecure API. So today we are using more and more cloud services. But what we miss is that not only you connecting to the cloud services, but third-party cloud services connecting to each other. Think about data analytics connecting to Salesforce, ServiceNow. It's a east-west traffic, cloud-to-cloud traffic. So at any time, you should be to identify what are the third-party services connecting to your managed services, cloud services, and to rank the risk for that third-party call, API call connecting to your managed services. Misconfiguration of cloud platform, mainly relying on infrastructures as a services. Misconfigure IAM policies, misconfigure path storage services, could be S3 bucket to all sensitive information in AWS. And because developers lack of time, they just set it up in AWS, a new S3 bucket, and forget to apply the right permissions. So you need to have a watchtower to control what are the correct permissions to apply or to remediate or to correct in case we see any misconfiguration. For the data in use, misuse by insiders, mostly from collaborative tools. How many of us have shared data over SharePoint Online or OneDrive, for instance? What's bad? What the problem? Not monitoring that. It's because it's so easy to share, to create a share link, that we need to rely the activities of collaboration based on the criticality of the document, of the file you want to share. The exposed data is following, means that if you fail to have the right let's say the activities on collaborative tools, you will be exposing possibly sensitive data. So you need to have technical tools. Also, you need to consider education to make sure that any of critical data is exposed publicly to the internet. Malware infection. Remember, data protection must be based on a triangle: CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability. Think about ransomware. Ransomware, which has been propagated over cloud. It exists today. That's something we see at McAfee, right? Ransomware integrates in documents stored in SharePoint Online. So how to avoid having the cloud as the next propagation vector for malwares? Compromise the account as part of the SecOps. Many bad guys try to compromise the account in order to steal your data, right? So to connect on the behalf of one of your employee to get access to business application and by the way to exfiltrate data. And finally, vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities will cause also a lot of data loss. Think about business application based on containers where you get a registry, a runtime which contain CVE, right? That's something you need to monitor to make sure that you are free of any vulnerability before you spin up a new processing resources, application program into the infrastructures. If you miss to consider these 8 different area, you probably will be facing some data loss, or you will be vulnerable at least to some data losses. Some of example about what happened in 2021. So we can see a different customer name, including Microsoft, including very famous name, Volkswagen and Audi, T-Mobile, where thousands, if not millions, of data has been exfiltrated because of at least one of the different components I just have explained before. So what could be the methodology? The data protection, a good methodology is to consider a framework. We think that the NIST is a good example, right? Because we have worked on an extended NIST cybersecurity framework to cover the cloud data protection topic. on different areas from asset management, access control, data security, threat protection, SecOps, response planning, especially regarding the forensics activities, improvement, and maturity model. So to follow that plan, actually, you need to consider three things. Your business objective, me as a company, as a bank, I want to drive innovation, I want to move to the cloud. At the same time, I'm facing some cybersecurity requirement, legislation, regulation, and so on. Some threats or some vulnerabilities coming from the technical environment, and all of this will be used to build what we call an operating model. This operating model will be actually your framework in order to adapt the right control catalogs. So we have worked, I've not so much time today to deal more in depth with that, but we are doing some workshop to deal with enterprise data protection framework solutions in order to first make you sure that you identify all of your assets in your company and that you map what are the technical requirements. And for each of the technical requirements, we'll be mapping some technical solutions coming either from McAfee, coming either from third-party solution partners, or just dealing with the process. So just some insight. I don't know how much time I still have. If I'm given 1-2 minutes more, will be absolutely great. But the issue is to break that complexity, because we are getting more and more assets. We get yesterday the endpoint, the network, the web, where some data were residing in that asset. Today with the cloud. At the same time, the market is addressing the challenge of a different technology, on-prem data loss prevention solutions for endpoint network, web protection for network web, and CASB solution, cloud access security broker for web and cloud. So 3 different solutions to cover 4 different assets. That's too much. So that's why we have invest in the Envision platform. This Envision platform is a comprehensive platform to deal with endpoint security, to deal with cloud security, including data protection, and same for infrastructures as a services. Regarding what the Gartner, the Ponemon, the Forrester says, in order to cover the most challenge for both SaaS and IaaS infrastructures, is relying on CASB plus CSPM plus CWPP. So posture management of your infrastructure, CASB to protect the data stored over your cloud application, and CWPP to protect your workload. A workload could be a Docker, could be EC2 in AWS, virtual device in Azure. Through that platform, we consider all of the possible different vector for data exfiltration or data loss. So that's a big overview about different use cases we can cover. But keep in mind that all of these use cases can be addressed over that comprehensive platform, which is Envision Cloud. So no need to add anything else to cover all of these use cases. One of the last thing is regarding how do you manage incidents. Incidents relying on data protection or data security are massive. So we want to be that incident massive because we want to collect the data. However, the real problem is not what you want to collect, but how to aggregate all of that data coming from different assets, mobile devices, sanctioned services, infrastructures, corporate data centers, etc. So you need to build some context about what the risk based on some activities, given the fact that a part of the activities probably has been done from corporate data center and ended on public infrastructures. That's something which is happening. So how to build a context, you need to have a management system to aggregate, to correlate all of the event coming from different source, on-prem or the cloud, in order to build a story and something which is understandable by data protection officers, by SecOps team, etc., to set the right priority on data protection, on data events or anomalies. how do we drive anomalies, or how do we help you to set the right priority to data issues? So all of the anomalies, threat relying on the different assets, including DLP anomalies, are mapped to the MITRE framework. MITRE is a combination of tactics and techniques, and actually we want to show you what is a possible kill chain for the data for your assets in order to break that kill chain as soon as possible, right? So this is something which is available today, and again, we want to fill the gap between complexity and usability of any data protection, of your data protection solution, and that's what we achieved, we accomplished with Envision Cloud today. Thank you so much.